Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to talk to you about two exercises because I was asked a question by a student recently about these two exercises. And of course, the question was asked or formatted in this way: which one is better? Right. And anytime I get a comparison between exercises, I always get well, which one is better? For this, or which one is just better in general for your, in this case, it was pecs. And those two exercises, by the way, are the TRX or the actual straps that you would use. Of course, TRX is the company, but we normally refer to any of the strap related devices where you have the straps located behind you. They are held onto like a pull-up bar or however you got them stationed. And then, of course, you've got the handles in front of you. Great exercise, obviously, or great equipment, and a great exercise, for instance, to use them for TRX chest press. Just as a, for instance, one of the best things about it, and I'm just talking about the straps or the TRX, and to be more specific, best thing about that exercise is the ease at which you can set these things up, get a tremendous number of exercises done without any additional resistance, all body weight. If you wanted to, you can use resistance, but that's not anything I'm going to get into in this video. But the point is that the TRX or the straps, that type of training methodology doesn't take up really any space at all, very little space, and you can get a lot done. It is a great modality of training. And so this student had asked me, comparing that to cable crossovers. Right. So cable crossovers, using the cables on either side. And you know what I'm talking about with the machine weights on either side. You grab the handles and cable crossovers, and you're training, obviously, your pecs. Now, again, the TRX, the comparison was which one is better, right? Because if I'm doing chest presses with the TRX, right, it's my body weight moving. And technically, for the most part, you could say that the TRX strap type of training modalities are what is known as a closed kinetic chain movement, only because the body is moving in relation to the hands being fixed. And remember, I'm talking specifically right now about doing a TRX chest press. So even though I'm showing you with my hands moving on the video, in reality, I'm grabbing my handles and my torso. It's just like a push-up, except you're using the straps, the handles on the straps. And of course, you're at whatever angle you're doing it at. The exercise itself, great exercise. And technically, it would be considered for our purposes as trainers. We're not getting into the heavy physics of biomechanics and the technical terminology and how it's related to closed and open kinetic or kinematic chains. We would say technically it's a closed chain movement because the hands are, for the most part, stationary, even though the hands can move. And that's one of the benefits of the TRX. But the torso is moving in relation to a relatively fixed hand position. Think of a push-up, right? So if you do push-ups on the ground, it's a closed kinetic chain movement. Why? Because the torso is moving in relation to fixed, what we call distal components, right? So the hands are the distal component, body is the proximal. And if you know the definitions of a closed kinetic chain movement, the distal is stationary, proximal is moving, body is moving, torso is moving, hands are stationary on the ground. Well, the TRX, technically, the length of the strap is fixed. So therefore, my hands are stationary and my torso is moving, right, in relation to a, quote, fixed distal component, right, the handles, my hands. But the fact of the matter is because they are free to move in, in space and time, so to speak, you got a lot of balancing, which is one of the benefits. So the student was saying, well, I like doing both, but which one is better? Now we go to the cable crossover. Once again, great exercise. I used to do cable crossovers all the time. Loved training cable crossovers. I also really liked when some of these companies came out with cable machines where, of course, nowadays you can change the relative height of where the cable starts from where the actual pulley system, right? The only ones I ever used to work on many, many years ago is that the cables started up on the top and you had to grab and pull down this way, right? So those were cable crossovers. Again, certain modifications you can make with them as far as how far down you go in your range of motion, but the cables are always at the top. Nowadays, like I say, of course, you can take the cables and pull them down, so you can actually do a cable crossover, through the horizontal adduction and abductive plane, right? Like this, sort of like flies. Great, again, great exercise. They really are. You can even lower them down and actually do them. You know what I'm talking about if you've seen these or you've done them yourself. So back to the question, which one was better? And the answer is I hate answering questions that one is better than the other. One is not better than the other. So that's why I wanted to explain this on this video. They are two very different exercises working on, for the most part, the same major muscles, right? So the pectoralis major, of course, deltoids. And in the case of anything where there's elbow extension, there's going to be tension, stress on the triceps. So the answer to the question of which is better, well, it depends on what you're looking for. Remember what I said: TRX straps, that type of modality keeps you in what are technically known as closed kinetic chain movements versus the cable crossover. So if you want to get a comparison on benefits or problems associated with each, I can give them to you. The benefit of the cable crossover versus the TRX is that cable crossovers are what are known as open. It's an open kinetic chain exercise. Why? Because my body, torso is fixed, distal component, right, midline of the body, distal is stationary, and the proximal component, or excuse me, reverse that, proximal here, distal up here. Even I got confused. Distal, the hand is moving. So proximal, distal. Understand that. So I've got the resistance, I'm pulling down, cable crossovers, right? So my hands are moving in time and space, and if they are the distal component of the kinetic chain. If the distal is moving to a relatively stationary proximal component, i.e., again, for us in personal fitness training, it's simple. If the body is stationary, it's not moving in time and space. I'm standing here and my hands are moving or my feet are moving. It's an open chain movement for the most part. It's just not necessary to go any deeper into the mathematics and the physics of it. So therefore, it's not a question of which exercise is better or worse. The question is what's the difference between open versus closed kinetic chain movements? Now, I will say this before I get into that. Keep in mind, irrespective of open or closed, whether it's TRX or cable crossovers, if you don't do the exercise correctly, if you do your range of motion in such a way that it becomes dangerous or unproductive, it doesn't really matter whether it's better or worse. So when you're doing the straps TRX type of movements, you definitely want to maintain control of your body. For instance, if you're doing presses, okay, you don't want to drop into it. You don't want to go down too low because that can hurt the shoulder. Same thing with the cable crossovers. Going way too up, far, and out behind you can stress your shoulder joint. The other thing, of course, with cable crossovers is this ability to cross the midline. And I see people do this all the time. It's seen people do it for decades, right? Where you come down and then they cross over this way as if they're going to get more benefit, I guess, in their pecs. That's just dangerous. Okay, don't be doing that. Do not cross over. In fact, you don't even want to touch. And I'm talking about from the health of the shoulder. So anytime you start to go through this position of horizontal adduction, horizontal adduction is movement toward the midline of the body with the arm parallel or at a horizontal position to the ground. Anytime you do that, you're going to put an inordinate amount of stress, actually dangerous, to the AC joint. So, and that's at any sort of positioning that you get close to the midline of the body with the hands. And it doesn't matter if it's out in front of you this way, crossing over this way, or you're literally adducting and pulling down in front of you, even if your hands are literally 6 inches away from your body. Anytime you start getting close to or cross over the midline, it's going to be potentially dangerous, especially when you're using excessive loads on these exercises. Not really designed for that. So given those two, what is the basic premise then behind open and closed kinetic chain movements? In this particular instance, the benefit of the closed kinetic chain movement, like push-ups and TRX, is the stresses and the forces that are being imposed on the joint. And in this case, we're talking about the shoulder joint. So the general understanding is that the benefit of closed kinetic chain movements is that we see greater, what are known as compressional forces in the joint itself. Now, that's a benefit from a stabilization perspective. Okay. I'm not going over this to any great extent with my clients when I'm talking to them, but for the trainer, it's important to know that when done smooth, slow, controlled, closed kinetic chain movements provide higher levels or greater levels of compressional stress and control at the particular joints that are being worked over. In this case, the shoulder. And by the way, that's really good and important because the shoulder is just not even a real joint in one sense. It's just one bone up against a small little concavity in the scapula, distal aspect of the scapula. So it's what's known as the glenoid. So it's not even a stable joint to begin with. And so anytime you can add exercises like closed kinetic chain exercises like the TRX and push-ups, it's going to be of benefit to that joint because of this idea of compressional forces that are actually creating stabilization, greater levels of stability at the joint versus the open chain. By the way, I'm not saying that's one is bad and one is good. I'm just saying they're different. And that's the answer to the question of which one is better. Well, this one's great for stabilization at the shoulder, and it's really ideal for individuals, well, for anybody, I guess, that's looking to create stabilization and safety while they're performing the exercises. Okay, that's critical. Open chain movements like the cable crossover, and by the way, I'm just going to throw every other open chain movement that we're talking about in here as well, from bench presses to dumbbell presses, you name it. Any movement where their hands are moving in relation to a stable body to train the pecs over the shoulder are going to increase what we call torsional forces. Torsional meaning those are these pulling forces, and those pulling forces are different than the somewhat different than the compressional forces, only because they stress the joint differently. So imagine my hand is flat on the ground, and now my torso is essentially pushing up against the shoulder with the hand stabilized, versus my body is stabilized, and now I've got my arm moving free in time and space. So you can imagine then that the force at the shoulder joint, particularly when you're doing presses or these cable crossovers, is going to have a different effect on the shoulder from a stabilization perspective. Hope that makes sense. The idea is that one is not worse or better than the other. They just provide different levels of adaptation over the joint. From the muscles perspective, is it different? Yeah, sure. It's a little different, but you're really seeing differences in the stabilizing components, i.e. synergistic muscles that are involved with it, the stabilizers themselves. They're going to function somewhat differently, which means as a trainer, I'm not interested so much in getting into the academic, going so deep into it academically, but as a trainer, what does that mean for you? It's not that you're going to do TRX or cable crossovers. My recommendation is you do both. Okay. In fact, what I like to do are supersets with open and closed kinetic chain movements. I like to do the open chain movement. So in this case, I would do cable crossovers. It's no better or worse than a TRX in certain ways, right? But it's a great exercise if done correctly. So I would do that first. This is what I would tell the student. I'd just say, do those first. And instead of taking a break and doing it again, no, go right into, for instance, TRX. So that would technically be the closed kinetic chain or push-ups. That's how I would do it. And I'd go back and forth on that. I hope that this video was helpful. Think about it from this perspective. The real question is not whether this exercise is better than this one. The first question is that exercise inherently dangerous? Is it inherently dangerous, like dips? Dips are inherently dangerous. It's an inherently dangerous exercise. I don't care how you do it. I don't care the way you do it. There's always going to be some inherent problems with the dip. for certain reasons. Leg presses, upright rows, these are all exercises that have inherent problems associated with them. So it doesn't matter if you're comparing them to one exercise or another. In the case of the TRX apparatus or a cable crossover movement, I don't see any real issues unless you do them incorrectly. Doing them correctly, right, with appropriate range of motion, speed, things like that, and appropriate loads that you're using, shouldn't be any issues inherently associated with them. Okay. So that would be the more important question, not to compare them, but to look at it as an example of within your programming, look as an example of how can I use both of those good exercises in proper relation to the programming that I'm trying to develop more of my clients. So that would be a good question. Look, if this is helpful, please type the word understand in the comment section below. Also, remember, if you want to become a certified personal trainer, it's also qualified. That's where you click on that link in the description box below. As always, have a great week. Let us know how we can be of assistance. And keep in mind, every Wednesday night, we do a live exam study. We use Quizlet Live. It's great. A great way to get together, spend 30 minutes studying for your exams that you are taking. So have a great week, and we will see you next week. Thanks.